it's been a bit slower than I think was expected when, CARB was kind of on this high a few years ago with the MOU that all, sort of 17 states signed saying, yeah, we want to decarbonize transportation. Um, and now we're sort of, it's like, reality is sunk in. This is hard.
This is Market Pulse on FleetOwner.com with Act Research. I'm Josh Fisher, an editor with FleetOwner, and I'm joined by Lydia Vieth, an analyst with Act Research. Lydia, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Always good to chat.
It is, and the last time we chatted, we were just at the start of the Trump administration 2.0. We talked about some potential regulations that could be rescinded or could be on the way. But now, and since then, in early March, the EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin came out and talked about what he said was going to be one of the biggest rollbacks of regulations in history, at least in some generations. He specifically talked about the heavy-duty focused greenhouse gas emissions, phase 3, the heavy-duty NOx rules, the 2009 endangerment findings that gave EPA the power to regulate greenhouse gases. What stood out for you over these first few months of the new administration?
That's a great question. A lot, it's sort of been fast and furious. I think one thing that has really stood out to me, and this is really in comparison to the first Trump administration, is that we're really seeing kind of a multi-pronged approach to kind of getting after these rules. So whether it's GHG3, the CARB waivers, Trump's executive order on day one kind of set out, here's what we want, what we plan to go after. And then between Congress and the EPA, we're sort of seeing sort of dual approaches to sort of attacking some of these things, whether it's the Transportation Freedom Act in Congress, as you said, Zeldin's announcement of everything the EPA is planning to look at, potentially revise. It's definitely seems to be sort of really deliberate strategy happening this time around that, hey, they had 4 years to come up with the plan. Whereas last time it was all new. So I think that's kind of been sort of the most interesting kind of, I guess, comparison just to see the sort of coordinated effort.
Yeah, it's obvious that they came in with a better game plan for this than they did in 2016, which has created certainly an interesting situation within the trucking industry. Because for years, whether you be a manufacturer, a fleet, or a supplier, we've been bracing for some intense emission regulations that have been expected to impact commercial vehicle prices. We've been waiting for this expected pre-buy before EPA 2027 kicks in. This seems to have receded. So it feels like there's more questions than answers. But I thought that you have this great chart that we're going to put up here on the screen, and I thought you'd go over it because the best way to know where we're going is kind of where we've been and what might happen. So I like this regulatory environment timeline to 2040, which puts us out 15 years into the future and starts about 15 years in the past. So this is a 30-year look. Can you just go over how what this means and thinking about it from, the trucking operating perspective?
Sure. So, right now you'll see we're in sort of a very colorful zone on this chart. Here in 24, there's, we're still in GHG phase 2 on the federal side of things, but with CARB, we've got heavy duty omnibus that started last year in 24. Advanced Clean Trucks started last year in 24 in California. Advanced Clean Fleet was supposed to start. That's not new since last time we talked, but California withdrew that waiver because they knew they weren't going to get an answer they liked. So right now, advanced clean fleets, not enforceable. So I think especially when you think about the carb side of thing, we'll get to the waiver conversation in a second, but um, it will make advanced clean truck maybe that much more challenging when you don't have the other side sort of requiring folks to buy these trucks. It's like, well, it becomes even harder to sell them when you're not, you don't have this buying rule in place. So um, I think we'll continue to see challenges with advanced clean truck compliance, especially as other states, I think almost all of whom have legislation in, within the state houses to delay the rule. So while none of those have been finalized, I think there's just this kind of indication like this might be harder than we all expected when we adopted this, handful of years ago. Um, then when we get into,
When you say
yeah,
harder, that means harder to for the technology to actually work, right? Not.
well, I think, I don't want to speak to technology because I think there are a lot of applications where ZEVs do work today.
Mhm.
But when you combine really expensive vehicle with a lack of charging infrastructure, especially where I'm on the East Coast, where Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey are all, in theory, come into effect this year. There's not a lot of charging infrastructure out here. So
Mhm.
when you start to have to put all the pieces together, it's like, well, who can reasonably make a choice to purchase a more expensive vehicle when uh, you might not be able to get the sort of have all the pieces aligned. Um, so I think there's just that expansion of infrastructure, costs coming down. It's all, it's been a bit slower than I think was expected when CARB was kind of on this high a few years ago with the MOU that all sort of
Mhm.
17 states signed, saying, yeah, we want to decarbonize transportation. Um, and now we're sort of it's like reality is sunk in. This is hard. Not I won't say not. Well, it's hard.
Which is something that I think it's which is hard to see from state houses and Congress,
Yeah,
right? As opposed to those who are actually out there doing the work, who have been maybe saying, "Hey, this is hard." So it seems
yeah.
right. Like it seems like the trucking industry is grateful that there's more attention now being said, "Hey, we need to take a step back."
I think so, and I think that's especially true when we think about the EPA's plans to not just take another look at GHG3, but they fully intend to create a new rule, a new GHG3 rule that will be totally revamped. And I think um, most of the industry is quite happy with that. When you looked at those, what's in the final rule as it stands today, when you look at some of those, sort of assumed ZEV adoption rates for especially in heavy duty, um, by 2032, some of these are really challenging numbers to hit. So I think a lot of folks in the industry are very grateful to um, just to see that get another look and to see something that hopefully is a little more realistic that will align more with infrastructure development. Not to say that there aren't applications, especially in lower GVW, um, where this does work today, where charging isn't, the kind of big to do and hassle that it is in heavy duty. But, hopefully we'll see something that's a little more aligned with, what's realistic.
Yeah,
Um,
and that all kind of matches up with
yeah.
like what the North American Council for Freight Efficiency calls the messy middle. And we certainly have seen it where if it's a yard tractor, battery electric seems to work
Yeah.
really
No
well.
brainer. Yeah.
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 Regional delivery, even in Class 8,
Hmm.
works well, box trucks, those sorts of things. But long
Yeah.
haul, which is really the backbone of a lot of freight and the U.S. economy, um, is just hasn't found that right answer yet, whether it be, alt fuels, battery electric. And that's certainly something that we pay a lot of it, gets the brunt of the attention. Do you feel
Yeah.
though like we're a lot like, whether it be regulators or the industry in general, is kind of ignoring all those wins that battery electric has found?
Uh, look, you're right that that's when you think about trucking, you're often thinking about long haul. Um, the class 8 is huge, in the sort of just the math of the total market. Um, so, I think what may have been a smart approach is to say, let's focus these regulations and decarbonize everything that makes sense right now. Let's go full out on decarbonizing, class 4, 5, even, some 6, 7, where this can make sense and it will continue to make sense. Uh, and let's work on that right now. And while we're building out the infrastructure and taking lessons from these successes that we are seeing in medium duty, just kind of give that time to build out this natural transition to maybe a rule that would say, oh yeah, and now it's time to get heavy duty involved. Unfortunately, that's not the way it worked, and that's not the way they decided to regulate. Um, but the flip side of that is I still don't think we're necessarily seeing the takeoff in medium duty that we would have, even ACT would have expected a few years ago. Um, there's this sort of challenge of affordability that just continues to persist. So even if you might see a pretty good payback and the TCO, um, you might have a better TCO than a diesel, when a truck still costs 2x up front, you can't necessarily, the bank might not necessarily want to loan you money for that because that's not historically what your balance sheets have allowed. So there's still these other challenges where we can say, yeah, this makes total sense right now, but um, what are kind of these kinks in the road that still exist? So uh, for better or worse, even where it makes sense, we see challenges. So um, kind of continuing to overcome uh, the price issue is gonna, I think it'll be around for a while.
Yeah, and that price issue also comes along into the back end of this, and that's the resale value of these, which I think I talked to some fleet managers and owners, and that's one of their worries, is if they're buying their equipment, will the battery still have the same charge power that it had when they first bought it? And no one really knows, or maybe like, what is this? What's the resale value of big expensive electric vehicles?
No one has a good answer for that right now. You're
Yep.
exactly right. We don't have it. And we have a ton of used truck data, but those are not ZEV transactions. So and it's just, this is, the reality of new technology is it'll take a while for there to be sufficient volume of trucks that can become used trucks. So um
Hmm.
yeah, still an unknown.
Um, what potential impact do these regulatory changes, you think, will they have on industry plans and investments? Putting aside tariff questions and other uncertainty that has greeted us so far in 2025. Do you feel like this is going to allow the industry to take a step back, if these deregulation pushes go through, and really fine tune it, maybe build out infrastructure to make it worthwhile? Maybe we'll understand how much resale value there is in this equipment, or are there other things that you're following along with those, the the pebble in the pond ripple effect of this?
Yes, I think a couple of things just to note, because it's, I think even, in our ZEV forecasting, we're certainly expecting a slowdown, at least in the next few years, as sort of some of the regulatory kinks get worked out. But I think one thing, well, a couple things that are important to note in terms of, where manufacturers are going to invest and will they continue investing in these zero emission technology? Yeah, absolutely. Um, first and foremost, these are all global companies. Europe has uh, higher, GHG emissions targets than the US has had. So um, as global brands, they can't just, full stop investing in improving their technology um, in any way. And then also when we think about the US, to just to refresh everyone's memory that the 2023 Clean Truck Partnership, um, that was an agreement between CARB and the Truck and Engine Manufacturers Association and its members in summer of 23, which really was an agreement to get CARB to align its 2027 NOx emission standards with the EPA. So it was a really important agreement, big success. But part of that agreement was that the OEs said, we will follow Advanced Clean Truck and we will follow heavy duty omnibus in the state of California, even if there are legal challenges or, other challenges that prevail that would axe these rules. So whatever happens with this administration, whatever happens to the CARB rules, the sort of ability for them to have waivers, the OEs have agreed that in California, this is all still happening. So they've got one state where they still have to meet compliance, and California is sort of roughly 9% of U.S. market. So in sales, so uh, it would be a big piece of the puzzle if you said, "Oh, forget it, we're not going to sell ZEVs," which means we're not going to sell trucks there. No, that's
Yep.
that's highly unlikely. So even here, they have they have their own sort of long-term decarbonization goals generally, but even as sort of a push, they still have this agreement that they've said we will follow. We're going to follow this rule. So investment in new technology is certainly not going away.
Yeah, of course. And, any administration, they all tend to last 4 years.
Yep.
And right. So, as we've certainly
Exactly.
seen, the ping ponging back and forth that we've seen really this whole century,
Yeah. Yeah.
is, things could revert back. But it seems like no matter what, just the Trump administration it feels like they're going to succeed on their goal, whether it even just be held up in the courts to slow down this push. But
Yeah.
I guess, does that also open up a period though for other powertrain technologies? For example, like natural gas, which renewable natural gas could be seen as a negative, net negative,
Hmm.
um, carbon net negative carbon fuel, but
Hmm.
was left out of a lot of the regulations. Do you see something like that having an opportunity to prove its worthiness?
This is something that as someone who's focused on decarbonization and transportation, I think this is something that we would like to see regulators kind of figure out how to include things like RNG or renewable diesel, um, where you do have really impressive, especially as you just said in RNG, sometimes uh, negative emissions. So it would be amazing if there was a way for regulators to factor these things in. Now, of course, the challenge is uh, you are regulating the manufacturers and they can't force the people that buy their trucks to use any certain fuel. So that's the challenge. But um, it would be great. It would be great if they could
Yeah.
find a way to factor that in more, because those are great options for decarbonization, especially as we've just said in long haul. It's really challenging. Sleepers are kind of not anytime soon on the ZEV front. So if you could use renewable diesel, um, or just even higher mixes of biodiesel, you could see some really great decarbonization improvements. But will that ever be sort of regulated on a federal level? It's hard because you can't force you don't want to force the consumer. As we were just trying to get rid of EV mandates, I don't know if
Yeah.
I think in terms of deregulation, it'd be like, well, we don't want to mandate anyone to buy anything. So, but this is, there is an opportunity for, natural gas, H2 ice. I think we're still a couple years away from uh, sort of from that being fully realized, sort of out on the roads. But and of course, we still have infrastructure problems. So that's any sort of new tech, new fuel, infrastructure is still going to be a challenge. But I think especially in long haul, it could kind of give just a little bit more time for the industry to figure out, all right, what works now and really where can we go, 10, 15 years from now. Um, just that little bit more time might be useful.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
It'll be nice to see give the market an opportunity to prove what's worth it and
Hmm.
what fleets should invest
Yeah.
in the long run. Before I let you
Yeah.
go, I'm just curious. We're recording this on March 26th. We're approaching the end of the first quarter of 2025. What are some things that you're watching in the regulatory space, in the middle of the year?
Yeah. So number one on my list is how quickly can the EPA get out a notice of proposed rulemaking for their new version of GHG3? I think um, that's kind of the big one. Uh, and then really sort of how long will it take Congress to move on the Transportation Freedom Act, which would get the CARB ball rolling. So, or reversing maybe is the better way to phrase
Yeah. Well, Lydia, it's always great to talk to you and pick your brain on this very complicated, complicated landscape of,
That's a nice word for it.
I thought, thank you. Complicated might be a kind way to describe the landscape that we're facing. But it's really great to get your input, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more as we move through 2025 on this.
I'm sure of it. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thanks, Lydia. Take care.